Hey everyone! Before we begin, we will have new Hylian Gamescast videos up every day, new gaming and Nintendo news videos every day, new Zelda theories or top 10 list videos every week, and even more. To do all of this, we need your help and support. If you would like early access to all of these new videos, shoutouts, being a guest in our videos, or having your question answered or topic discussed, then please visit patreon.com/GameOverJesse, where you can help support Jesse, Daniel, Chublima, and myself on all of the work we do here on the Hylian Gamescast. Once again, thank you for your continued support.
Hello everyone and welcome. I am Jesse, or GameOverJesse as all of you may know me. Here with us is our special guest, Stealth, who is off screen. We have...
Can't see him, he's too stealthy.
We have Captain Bergerson to my left. We have Ilya right above me, and then Chublima in the top left above Daniel. So in this video we're going to be talking about the history, or failed history really, of Zelda Gaiden, which is the disc drive version of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. So for a brief history before we get into this is basically like Ura Zelda was planned for the Ocarina of Time or Zelda 64. This was a game developed specifically for the disk drive, which had a lot more memory. It was going to be a 7-day time cycle instead of a 3-day, but the disk drive wasn't selling that well, so they moved it to the Nintendo 64, and then it became the 3-day cycle and Majora's Mask that we know now. But there potentially was going to be a lot more side quests, possibly more dungeons, I don't really know about that, and it was going to be a 7-day time cycle, a full week, as opposed to 3 days. And that actually started from a previous game that wasn't Zelda, where they had the idea of like a cops and robber style game that had like a week schedule, and then they moved it over to Majora's Mask. Anyways, this is an article from a website called N64 Mods Gaiden. I don't know who wrote it, but it's a great article pulling in interviews and stuff talking about Zelda Gaiden, sort of what we did to the Ura video where we hunted down 20-year-old interviews. Anyways, it starts off, Zelda Gaiden and Majora's Mask differences. Let me move my microphone a little bit. Sorry guys. If there weren't technical issues, it wouldn't be the podcast.
Damn straight.
Zelda Gaiden and Majora's Mask differences. Expect more stuff to be added sometime. Maybe. So this seems like an article that the writer was occasionally updating when he came across more information. Starts off, Zelda Gaiden was what the project and name of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was called. I am pretty interested in it, so at this page, I will talk about various differences and my opinion about Zelda Gaiden and its final product, which would be Majora's Mask. Story. The story of Zelda Gaiden. Do you guys know how it's pronounced? Stealth, do you know? Is it Gaiden? Gaiden?
I'd say Gaiden.
I usually say Gaiden, but I think you can say either.
Yeah,
I've heard it pronounced either way, but I usually say
tomato.
As well.
So
yeah,
our friends at Hardford Games, they have their podcast Hardford Games Gaiden, which they took the name inspired from Zelda Gaiden, because they talk a lot about canceled games and beta stuff, and they have like 1,000 Nintendo 64 disc drives, blue carts and everything. They're really rare. Anyways, so they pronounce it Gaiden as well. So I'm just going to call it that for now on. If I mispronounce it, people in the comments, they always like to correct you when you say something wrong.
Know.
So
spell something.
I'm just going to go ahead and say Gaiden for everyone. Anyways, the story of Zelda Gaiden was, even in some earlier stages, probably not going to be much different than that of the final version. Of course, since it first was developed for the Nintendo 64 disc drive, a lot has probably been cut out of the game, but there is nothing such that we know about to date, except that the game would have progressed in real time and set over a week rather than 3 days. According to IGN's old previews of Zelda Gaiden, it seems like some differences in the intro, for example, where the Skull Kid was named Stall Kid. May have just been a mistype by them though. And I believe the Stall Kid comes from the Stall Childs, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're called in Ocarina of Time?
I think that was a mistype because Skull Kid was already Skull Kid in Ocarina of Time.
Right.
Not new, not a new character from Majora's Mask. So.
All right. It continues, and that this stall kid tells Link he has stolen Epona rather than doing it right in front of him. That may be false since the trailer of Zelda Gaiden shows the cutscene from the final game. The biggest differences is probably that Navi was in the game instead of Tattle, as shown in some screenshots. This may just have been a placeholder though. According to IGN, again, there was also going to be a dark version of Navi in Zelda Gaiden. And he keeps referencing IGN. I want to say that at this point in time, IGN was, I think it was called IGN 64, and their main focus was Nintendo 64 games. So I would say like at least 80% of the information coming from IGN would be credible. So it continues. According to IGN again, there is also going to be a dark version of Navi in Zelda Gaiden, which may refer to either Tattle or Tell. I'm not sure why Link would walk around in the Lost Woods if he had Navi with him, though. There's also a quite known interview with Miyamoto where he stated that there would be a Jabu Jabu fishing game, which could prevent the moon from falling. There doesn't seem to be any traces of this left in the game, and to me, it all pretty much seems like BS. Yes, it was said by Miyamoto himself, but it is a fact that he wasn't very involved in the development of Majora's Mask. So that...
Quick thought, though.
Yes.
The Jabu Jabu fishing game was in the 3DS version of Majora's Mask.
Yeah, they did want to include fishing, but because it had the 1 year, they took it out. And I think that's why they re-included it into Majora's Mask 3D.
Just an idea they couldn't fit in initially, and they were able to do it in the end. So.
Yeah. Maybe it was like something where there wasn't enough memory on the cart to do it, because the storage on the cart was a lot less. Anyways, it says the biggest differences of the gameplay between Zelda Gaiden and Majora's Mask is probably that it originally was going to have 7 days instead of 3, and that the game would progress in real time. In an interview, Miyamoto said that there was... I guess that's a typo. There was a merchant who was selling time. That may indicate that the Song of Time was not originally going to warp Link back in time, and that the player had to buy time to be crushed by the moon. So I think this refers to there's probably a character or someone in the game that you could pay, and maybe they would slow down time or speed it up, and then that was changed to songs that you'd play on the Song of Time, or you could play it backwards or sped up. So
that's
you could...
interesting though. The way it was implemented using the Ocarina seems like such a more logical way to do it, based on the fact that the last game that they made so heavily featured the instrument and the music, warping and everything, and all the different songs. I can't imagine like what kind of weird explaining you'd have to do in game to have someone you could buy time from.
It could have been someone related to the goddess of time that's mentioned in the game, because when Zelda teaches you the Song of Time, she says she says something about the goddess of time helping you out. So in my mind, when you play the Song of Time, it isn't necessarily the ocarina that's taking you back and forth through time. It's the goddess of time basically like grabbing you and pulling you back to the beginning or something. Like it's...
See, I always thought it was kind of a combination of both. Like the song had special powers, but the instrument as well had a connection as well. But I don't know.
In this version, I think we'll get to it later, but he had the fairy ocarina that Saria gives you, not the Ocarina of Time. Anyways, items. The items in Zelda Gaiden seems to have gone through rather big changes. Here are most of the unused items. The most famous of which I believe this one got just changed into the Fierce Deity Link, is the Adult's Mask. The most popular unused item from Zelda Gaiden is probably the Adult's Mask. An unused mask which probably was used to turn Link into an adult. It can be discussed what function Adult Link was going to have in the game, since young Link now could use most of the items that he could not in Ocarina of Time. I think that Adult Link just was going to work as a stronger version of young Link, much like Fierce Deity Link, using the big Goron sword and thus dealing more damage. This is kind of getting into his speculation, but continuing, I think so mostly due to the fact that the model of Big Goron sword is still in the game. It is probably a leftover from Ocarina of Time though, and that all the transformations of Link was and is using an item or function which young Link could not use. And then adult Link would probably also have used another weapon or something. He could also have been using one-handed weapons and a shield, but I cannot find any reason for why he would do that. And another theory I have is that he actually would have the same function as in Ocarina of Time, being able to use certain items that young Link could not, for example. So yeah, I think this was just something maybe in the original version. They had the weapon set similar to Ocarina of Time, where you had to be an adult to use the bow and arrow. So maybe you had, like, if you wanted to use it, you had to turn into an adult. Maybe there's certain blocks that you'd have to push as an adult, but then you'd be able to push them as Big Goron as well.
Yeah. But then maybe they were like, but what's the point of just switching back and forth at this point? Like, it's only a grown up, and then they just decided to scrap it. But what's interesting is that in that icon, like, the bow is also equipped, which is not the bow from Majora's Mask. It's the same icon as in Ocarina of Time. Interesting. So maybe it's just a placeholder, but if at that time adult Link was meant to use the items that young Link couldn't, the bow is like the first item that is like that distinction in Ocarina of Time, right? So
yeah, still,
it's interesting.
Do you have any thoughts on this so far, since we're halfway through it? Like, you were aware of Zelda Gaiden before, weren't you? I'm sure you've researched it, Stealth.
Oh, actually, I was fairly new to it. I didn't realize there was the canceled version of it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like, yeah. I'm always shocked in terms of like Majora's Mask, how he was, was tasked to creating this game in 1 year, and just how well it turned out, and he specifically called it a side game because, like, at that time people were crazy for Ocarina of Time. And like calling anything a sequel, like a direct sequel to that, would have come off very badly. So he made sure it was called a Gaiden,
especially since it came out so soon after. Because usually, like, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, that was a really long wait. So,
and it's not really fashionable now to call games Gaiden or side games. They just give it a different title and say, "Oh, it's in the same." They don't specifically call it a side
Heroes.
Game. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think one of the really interesting things about it is everyone talks about, like, oh, this game's being rushed, it wasn't good, or like, this game sucks, this was missing because it was rushed. But then with Majora's Mask, the entire purpose of it was to be rushed, and it's one of everyone's favorite game, or not everyone's, but like if you talk to a Zelda fan, it's always at the top of their list. So the fact that the reason this game exists is because it was rushed is very interesting, because Miyamoto and everyone has a lot of quotes like, a rushed game could, I forgot what the quote was. Do you remember, Daniel?
It was something like
something about like a delayed game.
A delayed game may be good, a rushed game will end up being bad forever, something like that. But I think Miyamoto's even kind of gone back on that statement, being like, that was kind of taken out of context. But what I mean is, it's sometimes we delay things because we want them to be good, basically. But people love that quote, even though I think it's kind of misleading. Another
weird, the fact that Zelda Gaiden even existed at one point is really strange, because so we talked about Ura Zelda a few days ago when we had like Illy and Daniel wasn't here. I would have liked Daniel to be on it, but he was busy. So anyways, we talked about how Ura Zelda, it began, like, we went through all of the interviews. There was like 20 or 30 interviews that we went through. And Ura Zelda began as just a disk drive game. Similar to the original Legend of Zelda, it began as a Famicom disk drive game. And then it was moved to the NES cartridge, and then it was, that version was made into the Famicom cartridge. But it was originally released as a disc, and it's the release of Ocarina of Time, I believe, was going to resemble that, where they had planned it to just release on the disc drive. Like, the big game for the Nintendo 64 base model would have been Super Mario 64, and then the big game for the disc drive would have been Zelda 64. But then they seen that it wasn't selling well, so they moved production to the cartridge, and they were going to release all the stuff that they had cut out from the disk drive game as the Ura expansion. But then there's interviews where Miyamoto talks about how like 6 months or so before the game released, they ended up like delaying the game, and they had changed like the entire story of it. And I think that's when it changed from Zelda 64 with the Ura expansion to just the Ocarina of Time that we have now. And then the Ura expansion was changed to what we have as Master Quest. So it went from a disk drive game to a cartridge game that had a disk drive expansion. And then because the disk drive wasn't selling well, they ended up canceling the expansion to it as well and changing the whole story. So if they had to basically rework what Ocarina of Time was because the 64 disk drive wasn't selling well, why would they begin production of their next Zelda game using the disk drive? Like, if they know the disk drive isn't selling well and they had to cancel games on it, why begin production on the disk drive again? That's really strange to me. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, Stealth? Stealth?
He snuck away.
Oh, all right.
He's too. Oh, he said his audio cut out.
All right, Daniel.
I mean, it's weird. I guess maybe they were holding out hope, but I don't know. I don't have a rational explanation. I can never rationalize anything Nintendo does. To be honest, I don't know, man. They may have just been holding out hope that, like, okay, it hasn't caught on now, but this Zelda game was so great, and if people want another one, maybe if we put it on the disc drive, people will buy it. Yeah. Or maybe they hadn't. I don't know. Maybe they just wanted to try it, but then it just didn't pan out. They're like, I don't know, man. I got nothing.
All right. Well, this we've got a part coming up that sort of connects to Hyrule Warriors, which is really cool. So this next one, there's a lot of stuff in there, but it's just small things like items and stuff that was changed. But this says Fairy Ocarina. This is what I was explaining earlier about the Ocarina of Time. It says, in Majora's Mask, Link was apparently originally going to use the Fairy Ocarina instead of the Ocarina of Time, as seen in the many screenshots. I don't know why he would want to use the crappy Fairy Ocarina instead of Ocarina of Time, since the Fairy Ocarina could not let him warp in time. Yes, he hands over the Ocarina of Time. What doesn't, if you... No, never mind. I was thinking Ocarina of Time, when you turn back to a kid, you can still warp, but he still has the Ocarina of Time.
Right, but he does give it back to Zelda at the end of the game, so maybe that's why he just had, he still had that one. Maybe he didn't ditch it like we all assumed.
Yeah. So he says, yes, he hands over the Ocarina of Time to Zelda in the end of Ocarina of Time, but when he warps back to being a kid, and it does show that cutscene where you learn the Song of Time and Zelda hands it to him and teaches the Song of Time to him. So they do have that scene in there as like, oh, now he has the Ocarina of Time. Anyways, he hands over the Ocarina of Time to Zelda in the end of Ocarina of Time, but then he warps back to being a kid when he still owned the Ocarina of Time. It is also, I think he was warped back before he got like to that first moment where he met Zelda. I think that's where he got warped back to, but that's just me. It is also possible,
I think that's the implication,
that the Fairy Ocarina was used while the Ocarina of Time was stolen, and the story had a bit more with retrieving the Ocarina from Skull Kid or something like that. Yet another possibility is that the Song of Time originally wasn't even present in Majora's Mask, or at least didn't have the same function. The icon of the Fairy Ocarina is still left in the final product, but when used, it acts like the Picto Box. That's weird. Yeah, this next part's the final part to his article that connects it to Hyrule Warriors, which is really cool. The Megaton Hammer. This hammer that was used in Ocarina of Time was probably going to be used by Goron Link. As seen in screenshots from earlier stages of Majora's Mask, it was probably replaced by the punching and ground pounding thing that he can do. I think that it would have been cooler to have the Megaton Hammer instead of the things that were used in the final game, but that is just my opinion. So yeah, the Megaton Hammer, when you hit the ground, it shakes the ground a little bit and you can see the force coming. It's basically the same effect as when Goron Link does do the ground pound. And then his punches are strong enough in the game to where it would also resemble, like, instead of using a sword, you're just using the Megaton Hammer to hit. So personally, I think that's a little bit cooler, and they brought back the Goron punching in Twilight Princess. Whenever you're trying to climb up the mountain, the Gorons come to you, so that's really cool. But yeah, the weird thing to me is just like, why, if they knew the disk drive was failing and that's why they canceled a bunch of games, why would you begin production of a new game using the disk drive when you know that maybe like with Animal Crossing, it began on the disk drive and then they changed it to the cartridge and then they put it on the GameCube as a game. So maybe they were thinking about, we can just develop this for the disk drive and just release it as a GameCube game, maybe? Who knows? Another interesting thing is that the shield, is it the hero shield in Majora's Mask?
Yeah.
The hero shield, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're back. Sweet.
I'm back.
So, yeah, so
Snuck
earlier,
back in.
I guess I'll go through this and we'll ask you the question that I was trying to ask earlier. But the hero shield is the same shield that Adult Link has in the Space World tech demo from 2000, which I think the tech demo was made before, like, I think it was an interview that said it. It was in one of the Did You Know Gaming things. And, like, most of their facts are right, but sometimes, like, some things don't add up to what the interviews actually said. But they said that the Space World tech demo was made before Majora's Mask. And then
That makes sense because they were probably just making it to demo, like basically just GameCube's graphics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the hardware, they were like the GameCube, was it released in 2001? Am I remembering right?
I'll look it up really quick.
Okay, but they were probably working on it for a long time before its release, of course, right? So they probably developed that sometime while developing the console.
September
And that would have been
14th,
going on
2001.
either. Okay, so it was 2001, yeah. So Majora's Mask came out in 2000. So yeah, they probably would develop that probably maybe not before, but I feel like alongside Majora's Mask then. But like probably around the same time, and they saw that and they're like, okay, that's the new design for Link's Shield in the newest Zelda game, so we'll use that.
Yeah.
You know?
So, with the production of Majora's Mask, the reason it was rushed was Nintendo had this new console coming out, the GameCube. And Wind Waker released in 2002, 2003? Was it 2003 in America and 2002 in Japan? Or,
Oh, maybe that's it. I keep thinking 2002 though.
I'll look it up really quick.
I'll check. Okay, you can check too.
Yeah.
We'll both check.
I don't want to get the facts wrong on this. Yeah, so it was 2002 in Japan, 2003 in North America. So, yeah.
Bingo.
All right. So Majora's Mask was rushed because there was we even read it on, it was an Iwata Asks that we read the other day where Iwata is talking to Aonuma, and it was about the Majora's Mask 3D release, and they were also talking a little bit about Ura Zelda and how that some of the stuff was moved over to Majora's Mask and other games. But he said that there was sort of an argument, in their words, like I imagine it was like a playful argument or whatever, because I can't imagine Miyamoto and Aonuma like shouting at each other. But Miyamoto wanted to move on to the next console and create like a Zelda game that wouldn't be possible on the Nintendo 64, because with the GameCube you're allowed to do a lot more. One of the things that Miyamoto referred to that you could do on the GameCube that wasn't possible on the Nintendo 64 is really simple. He wanted to be able to have sword combat while riding Epona. But with the Nintendo 64, he wasn't able to, for some reason, technical issues, it wouldn't allow Link to swing his sword while riding on Epona. So, whenever Twilight Princess came, that was a big focus in Twilight Princess. Like in the first trailer, it shows the horse combat. When you fight the King Bulblin, whatever his name was, you have a few battles with him with sword combat. The main boss fighting Ganondorf, you have to chase him down, have the sword combat before you have the dueling sword fight. So that was a big focus on the game. So Miyamoto wanted to just move on so he would be able to do the things that he wanted to do with the game. But Aonuma still wanted to work on the Nintendo 64 and release a game on the Nintendo 64 because they had all of the unused assets and dungeons from Zelda, and he wanted to be able to create something to use those, so they ended up having the agreement that if he could make a new Zelda game within a year, then he could. And that's why Majora's Mask reuses a lot of the same character models as Ocarina of Time. I imagine a lot of the dungeon puzzles that's in Majora's Mask were puzzles and stuff that were cut from Zelda and moved over and changed a bit. Like famously, the ice cavern was shortened to a mini dungeon when everyone thought it was supposed to be like a full-fledged ice dungeon. And theoretically, beating that boss would be how you unthawed Zora's Domain, but that was cut out. But that's just speculation. So it could be that, you know, the Ice Caverns dungeon was just moved over to the Snowhead Temple, or whatever it's called in Majora's Mask, and the puzzles were changed around a bit to work with Goron Link. Because after the Fire Temple, you would have had the Megaton Hammer, which is basically the same as the Goron punch, because at the bottom of the article we just read, we seen that Goron Link would have had the Megaton Hammer instead of punching and ground pounding. So, and
its use in game is like equivalent as well, like the Goron Pound. And
so
yeah, I feel like the Goron Pound was only actually used in like 2 puzzles in Majora's Mask. It was
yes. Yeah. But how many puzzles did Ocarina of Time use the Megaton Hammer?
Just like the rusty switches.
Yeah, rusty switches.
So in the last article where we seen Goron Link using the Megaton Hammer, and that was just switched to his normal punches and ground pound, and you use Goron Link in the ice dungeon, and you get the Megaton Hammer before you get to the ice dungeon or the ice cavern in Ocarina of Time. So it's likely dungeons like that were just moved over and changed a bit to make use for Goron Link. Anyways, I keep getting like really into detail. I'm sorry, guys. I love talking about Zelda. So, with the space tech demo, one of the things that I thought about is Wind Waker was created in the cartoony art style because I believe it was Miyamoto or Aonuma. One of the two was tired of the Nintendo 64 realistic style, is what they called it at the time. So they wanted to do something different, and one of the artists or developers, whoever, was doodling a cartoon version of Link. One of them saw it, loved it, and decided to make the whole game look like that Toon Link. So if Majora's Mask wasn't created, so they had the one game that looked like Ocarina of Time, and then they had another game in that same art style. They had the tech demo that was made before, coming from the interviews, the tech demo was made before Majora's Mask, and it uses the same shield and everything. But then when it came time to do the GameCube Zelda game, they were tired of that art style, and they made it the cartoon art style. So I think if Majora's Mask wouldn't have happened, they would have only had one game in that art style instead of having 2 games and a tech demo all in the same art style. So if Majora's Mask wouldn't have happened, I think Aonuma or Miyamoto, whoever it was, wouldn't have gotten tired of that art style. And since they made Majora's Mask after they made that tech demo, I think it's likely that if Majora's Mask didn't exist, we would have gotten a game in the art style of that tech demo. So that's just a theory for me, but what do you guys think about that before we move on? Would you guys like to see, if you've seen the Zelda tech demo from 2000? It's
oh yeah.
It was really cool.
Yeah, I've seen it.
It was why everyone got upset with Wind Waker, because they were expecting that, and then they got cartoony, and they complained, and they shouldn't have, because Wind Waker's beautiful. It's really weird. I get a lot of comments on some of my videos talking about the development of the Wind Waker, and people are like, "Why do you hate the Wind Waker graphics? Everyone loves it. Blah blah blah." And I'm like, I didn't say it. Yeah, I was like, I didn't say I hated it. I love it. Like, I have to reply to them and say, no, I love it. It's people back in like 2002, 2003 that hated it,
Oh
not
yeah,
me.
people.
Yeah,
Were
they don't.
mad about it.
Yeah, they don't understand that it's not me. Anyways, moving on. So Stealth, yeah, you're there. Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on all of the Wind Waker stuff? Like, as good as the Wind Waker was, would you have wanted to see that a Zelda game based off of that tech demo? And if Majora's Mask didn't exist and they didn't get tired of that same art style, do you think they would have created a game based off of that tech demo, or do you think we would have just ended up with Wind Waker anyways?
That's a good question. I honestly don't like Wind Waker as a game at all. I really do not like it. I think I just don't like it just because the dungeons I find a little elementary, but that's neither here nor there. But I do think that if Majora's Mask didn't happen, they probably would have gone with something more like Twilight Princess first. Because Miyamoto just seemed to not want to do the same graphical style more than a few times in a row. And that's something that he actually kind of keeps doing. Because, if you look at like Skyward Sword and then to Breath of the Wild, and then before that to Twilight Princess, they're all pretty different.
Yeah. That's why one of my favorite things about the Zelda series, like, if you look at the Assassin's Creed franchise, it just looks the same, but better as it goes on. If you look at like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Need for Speed, whatever, it always just looks the same, but as technology gets better, the graphics get better. But with Zelda, like, I look at Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask because the games, especially in the 3D versions, look exactly like the artwork for it. So in my head, I think of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask as like a manga style, where like Wind Waker's cartoony, Twilight Princess is realistic for the time. So every game has its own unique art style that sets it apart, whereas other franchises always just look the same but more detailed and better. So you start out with the manga art style, you go to a cartoony art style, then a realistic art style with Twilight Princess. You have the painting art style. I forgot the exact type of painting that it was based off of.
Open air.
Oh, no, that was Breath of the Wild.
Oh, I thought that's what you meant.
No.
Never mind then.
Skyward Sword had like a
Impressionist
specific
painting.
It was more impressionist,
yeah. So it had the painting art style, and even if you got further away from objects, it did a really cool developer trick to where, because the Wii didn't have a lot of RAM, so when you got further away from something, instead of it just fading out and disappearing, the background would, like, the area would disappear, but it would just be like drawn onto the texture for the background, and it would like kind of fade into it, which is really cool. Because the Wii didn't have much RAM, and it was competing with like HD consoles and stuff. So they had like really cool developer tricks. Anyways, it was a painting art style. And then the next game, Breath of the Wild, everyone's like, what are they going to do? They had manga, they had realistic, cartoony, a painting. What could they do next? And they ended up making it completely different, and it's like an anime art style. So, like, looking at the future of Zelda, like they would have to go back and redo something. Like they would have to redo like an older art style because they've done literally everything. But anyways, continue, Stealth. Sorry for interrupting. Again, I just love Zelda, talking about it.
Oh no, that's fine. But I remember that time looking at that Space World demo, like just blown away, as that's really what I wanted. But yeah, then we got Wind Waker. I never got particularly angry, about it. Like, I remember the incredible backlash about it when it was first announced, but then after the first trailer, and I forget when the first trailer was, things started to
For
cool
Wind
down
Waker?
a bit. Yeah, for Wind Waker. And I also know that Miyamoto did an interview in, I want to say EGM, like, well before Wind Waker was announced, and he actually said that it wasn't going to look like the tech demo. So he had actually like prepped people before, but obviously people weren't really paying attention. But
So the first gameplay footage, or the first trailer period for Wind Waker, was shown off just the very next year at 2001 Space World. So
Yeah, so
that's actually a really quick turnaround from going from having nothing to the trailer they showed off.
Honestly, the early 2000s must have been bomb time to be a Zelda fan, because like
they had a
you
lot.
got Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask right there at the late 90s, and then Wind Waker, and then you got all the like GBA games.
yeah, it became more of a yearly. Yearly franchise. There was more of a gap between Wind Waker and Minish Cap, I believe. I think that was a 2-year gap, but still, I mean.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, there was a lot happening for Zelda around that time, and you had like Four Swords coming out, and it's Four Swords, and then Four Swords Adventure, and A Link to the Past getting re-released on GBA. That was later.
Yeah. So in the chat, EPS 5000 says they need to make a new 8-bit Zelda game. It's been around 30 years since the last one. I think he's thinking of only Zelda 2 being 8-bit. But all of the Game Boy games were 8-bit as well. So like you had Link's Awakening, Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons. They were all 8-bit as well.
They technically are 8-bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they look a little bit more refined and better than OG NES Zelda 1 and 2, but I think that's just because people had a bit more of the technical know-how to make 8-bit games look better.
Yeah.
Like, look at the difference between Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Bros. 3. Like,
I was about to say, yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, sorry.
Yeah. So, final question. Sorry, for some reason I wanted to call Stealth Ninja, because like
Ninja.
Stealthy Ninja.
You can call me that.
Sorry. Anyway, Stealth. The question that I tried to ask earlier when you were having audio issues, I assume, I asked everyone else. I think I did. Anyways, so Majora's Mask. When they began production, they began it on the 64 disk drive, and that's where Zelda Gaiden came from. But before they started it on the disk drive, like they had the Ura expansion in Zelda 64 that, like, before it became Ocarina of Time, it was just known as Zelda 64. It was planned for the 64 disk drive, but then it didn't sell well, and they had to make it just a cartridge for the Nintendo 64 because the disk drive wasn't selling well. So they canceled a lot of games for the disk drive. They stopped working on them, and they only released Ocarina of Time as a cartridge with no disk drive expansion because they thought nobody would buy the disk drive. But after that, when they first began work on Majora's Mask, for some reason, after canceling everything for the disk drive, they began work on Majora's Mask for the disk drive. Do you have any idea on why they would do that? Like, it was failing so much that, like, Ura Zelda and Ocarina of Time couldn't, like, they made it a cartridge game because they knew it wasn't selling well on the disk drive. But then when they start the next Zelda game, they begin it on the disk drive. So, thoughts?
Yeah, Nintendo has this theory that, one game can change the fortunes of a piece of hardware. So, it's possible that, they kind of thought of Majora's Mask as a reboot for it, and maybe thought that somehow that would, make it better. And they never released the disc drive in the US, although there are a few, like, US dev kits that have been floating around. But yeah, I just have a feeling that they thought that maybe somehow that would, like, reboot sales in Japan, and then, they could, like, have 2 revenue streams for it, like have it on cartridge and then have it on the disc drive. Obviously that didn't work out so well, but I assume they just wanted to give it one more try.
All right. Thank you. I think we're ready to move to the last one. If you have to go at any time.
Wait.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Ilya?
I had a comment about the Zelda Gaiden thing.
Yes,
Words.
Sorry.
Just something I had thought of. Hold on. I always keep a journal with me so I write down my notes. I mean, obviously we know some of this was changed. Like, they talk about, like, there was originally, like, an adult Link mask and stuff. And maybe this is pointing out the obvious, but it would make no sense to have an adult Link mask, because what background story would you give to that? I mean, I'm sure they could have come up with something, but I just think it's cool that they came up with the story of the fierce deity to give an excuse to have basically an adult Link. and I think we already touched on this, but with the Fairy Ocarina, it's like, how would you accomplish anything with the Fairy Ocarina?
Yeah.
Which, again, I know we can't touch on that. I was like, it makes sense to give them the Ocarina of Time, because we at least know that has connection to the goddesses and to powers and things, but that was just the only thing I had to say.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
You wrote that down?
Yeah, also, when I was looking down a lot at the beginning of the podcast, is because I was writing down for my top 5s for the thing we're going to talk about later.
Ah,
That's really
smart.
great. You're awesome. Like taking notes and paying attention. It's like the exact opposite of me.
It's good. Chublima's falling asleep, and I'm like spinning in my chair,
Somehow
going.
I'm not falling asleep.
Just...
But-
All right.
Doing a heckin' stretch.
So what's the time? 1:30.
The time.
1:36.
You want me to put that in there? You want me to take a note?
If you can put it beside, yeah, it really helps
What was it?
in editing. 1:36.
1:36.
So are you guys ready for the next one? I think we can get through this one
Yes.
really fast, and then yeah. But if at any time you need to leave stealth, just let us know.
Yeah.
I don't want to
Oh,
take
I
too
think
much
he
of
just
it.
said that he
I
needs to
think
leave.
he just said that.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
kind of need to jump out.
All right. Well,
Oh,
thank you for
no.
joining.
That's okay.
Sorry we took up all your time.
Oh no, it was my pleasure. I'm sorry I had audio issues and computer issues in general.
No, it was
No
great the other
worries.
day when you messaged and asked if you could join on a podcast. Did you like notice that I had unfollowed you, or was it just like?
Oh no, I
You
have like a bunch of free time now, so I was looking for podcasts to like jump on,
All right.
and then I noticed you had 0 followers, so I thought your account got hacked at first.
Aw.
Oh, no one would hack Jesse. He's too wholesome.
Yeah, no one cares that much anyways. I couldn't believe it. There were so many people that got angry whenever I unfollowed everyone. Like, they took it personally, and I'm just like, no, it's not you. It's everybody.
Even I
It's
got
everyone.
unfollowed, guys, and we
Yeah.
all know how much Jesse
Yeah.
loves me, especially me shirtless. And if you unfollowed me on Twitter, there's less chance of seeing that.
Yeah, but like,
Yeah, Daniel's like the golden child of our podcast. We hold him delicately in our hands.
but it was weird because like in my head, like I didn't think anyone cared that much about me, to where like if I unfollowed them, it would just like ruin their day or something. But there were so
Yeah,
many
and
people
I
that
would've-
messaged.
I would have told you to tweet out first that
Yeah.
you were doing it.
That was probably a
because
good idea.
I
if
tried to do that a long time ago, and yeah, you get backlash when you like unfollow everybody and not say, oh yeah, I'll follow some people back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, people get
I'm
angry.
so confused. What happened? Is this Twitter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like
Twitter
Oh.
merge.
I just unfollowed a lot of people. Like, so I had like 5,000 and something followers, and I was following over 1,000 people because for a while I would just follow back everyone that followed me as sort of a thank you. But then it got to where like I would never see Daniel's posts or Chiblima's or Stealth's or anyone's. It would just be like random posts from random
Yeah.
people, and a lot of them were bots, like not PG bots, where like they would just post pictures, like nude photos, and be like, follow me on Snapchat or something, which is fine. People can do whatever they want, but it's like, I don't want to be scrolling through Twitter on my phone when I'm like with my daughter and she looks over and is like, Dad, what's that? And then I have to explain to her because I'm just following random people on Twitter. So instead of just like unfollowing individual people, I did a thing to where it unfollowed everyone, and then I started following back people, and then people started like putting up vague messages like, oh, it sucks when you follow someone, or like someone follows you. It was weird too because he said like famous or something like that, and I'm like, I'm not famous. But they were like, it sucks
Big
when
YouTuber.
yeah, like a big YouTuber, famous, whatever, follows you, and then you follow back, and then they unfollow you. And someone commented on that because they didn't name me, and they were like, oh, that sounds like GameOverJesse. So I had to like read this like big apology. It's like, oh, I didn't mean to ruin anyone's day, blah blah blah. It's just I
You
was
became a
unfollowing
villain
everyone.
overnight.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyways, Stealth, thank you so much. It's Stealth with 3 underscores.
And it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yes. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye, Stealth.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
And he snuck away.
Yeah.
And it's okay. I purged my personal Facebook a long time ago. I got rid of over 400 friends.
crazy.
They were
I
all
did
from,
that
like-
recently too, but
They
not
were
that
like from
many people.
elementary school. It was like elementary school or people that I talked to once on campus. I'm like, if I use Facebook, it's to connect with people from really far away that I'm really close friends with.
Yeah.
So.
No, I really use Facebook just for people I know personally or family, close friends, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I did a Facebook purge recently and like cleared out like a good 25% of the people I had, and it was like over 100 people, and I was like, it felt good, honestly. That first delete is like a gateway drug. It's just like, yes, who else can I delete?
Yeah. All right, so 2D Zelda, you guys ready?
Yes.
All right.
Hey everyone, it's me again, Elia Rose. I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching this video. And you know what? If you're a fan of videos like this, you should totally subscribe and give this video a like and comment below to let us know what type of videos you would like to see us create in the future. And if you would really like to support all of us here at the GameOverJesse channel, please consider purchasing a GameOverJesse t-shirt or becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/GameOverJesse, where you can receive many rewards, such as getting shoutouts, having any topic or theory that you select discussed on the podcast or made into its own video, having your question answered, joining on as a guest on the podcast, and playing with us during our Twitch live streams at twitch.tv/GameOverJesse, and much, much more.